Hi, my name is Philip Bloom and I wanted to do this short introduction to the video that you're about to see, the camera comparison between the Panasonic Af100, the Sony FS100, which is a pre-production model, and the Sony F3, which is the camera filming me right now. We do have a little bit of Canon 5D Mark II in there, just for some comparison shots. This is not the Sakuto shootout. There's a completely big, different kettle of fish. That's a huge deal, very technical, very accurate, huge number of cameras, and that comes out in June, which is going to be fantastic. This is simply coming at it from a cameraman's point of view, about operation, about use of the camera in a real world situation, what it's actually like in the field to use these cameras, how the features compare with each other, and of course a little bit of image comparison. Because it's real world, there are going to be some anomalies, the light changes, situation changes, and occasionally we don't necessarily have the right lens, certainly when it came to the 5D Mark II. But we try to get things as accurate as possible with our color profiles and try to make things as realistic as possible, because this test is the sort of thing that I want to see, and that's why I made it. I hope you enjoy it. We are not scientists. This is not a laboratory. So we're out on the Riverside in Richmond, and we're going to test out the F3, Sony F3, the FS100. In the bag we have the AF101 from Panasonic. I've also got a 5D Mark II from Canon. So it's going to be interesting to see with this bright sunshine, which is quite rare in England. So we've got some bright sunshine, we've got some shadows, and it'll be good to do a comparison. This is very, very unscientific, but just a real world example, just to see how well these cameras perform. So I'm going to be recording internally on all of the cameras. So that's S by S cards on the XD format EX, which is 35 megabits/second on the F3, on the FS100 and the AF101. It's going to be 24 megabits/second on SD cards, and of course on the Canons on standard compact flash cards at H.264. But I am also recording at the same time on the camcorders, not the actual DSLRs, because the DSLRs can't give me a clean signal out. Using the camcorders, I'm going to use the Atomos Ninja here. I'm going to record, right now I'm recording at ProRes HQ, which is a 10-bit recording format, and using the HDMI. Unfortunately, I can't send a straight 24p signal into this. I have to embed it in the 60i stream and use pull down to remove it. That's the downside of HDMI rather than SDI. I want to make this as apples to apples as I possibly can, so this is more, say, Golden Delicious against Granny Smith's. It's going to be as close as I can do it, and what I'm going to do to help that along is simply use a similar glass as I can across the cameras. I'm using Zeiss lenses across all of the cameras, across the F3, the AF101, the FS100 and the 5D Mark II. And what I'm going to use is compact prime CP.2s on all the video cameras using adapters, because these are PL lenses. This is an adapter from MTF Services for the FS100. I have one for the AF101, and of course the F3 has one already built into it. And for the actual Canon, I'm going to use ZE glass. It's the same optics, so it's pretty close, but I don't have any actual EF mounts for the CP.2s. So as I say, it's apples for apples, but not quite the same types of apples. The cool thing about the AF100 or 101, as this one is, and the F3, is they have SDI connections as well as HDMI. HDMI, you know, it's not great. It's a consumer connection. It's for plugging your Xbox into a TV once and leaving it connected. It's not designed for being pulled and plugged the whole time. But we are using HDMI so we can record on the Ninja, because this is an HDMI only. Otherwise I'd have used something like the Convergent Design Nano Flash. I'm using a really nice Marshall LCD monitor. It's bright sunshine. This is the catchily named VLCD 70XP HDMI PT. PT stands for pass-through, so you can have HDMI in and HDMI out going into Ninja. So that's what I'm doing. I'm feeding the AF100 into this, and then it comes out here, and it should be identical quality because it's digital. The monitor's fantastic. I'm in bright sunshine, and I don't need a sunshade. I can see everything I need to. Now, straight away, the biggest problem I've got with this camera compared to the F3 is simply the lack of ND filters. It's very bright sunshine here, and I really could do with it. To use ND on lenses like this, I'm gonna have to start using a matte box and drop in 4x4 filters. Straight away we have a slight difference in the actual cameras, which is a bit frustrating. So what I'm going to have to do, because I can't get exposure at f/22. These cameras are so sensitive. This is rated as a 0 dB at ISO 800, so it's pretty sensitive. So at the moment I'm at 0 dB, I'm at f/22, and I'm still way overexposed, so I'm going to have to bring some shutter in just to get exposure to what I want. If I didn't do what I'm doing right now, I know I would get so much grief from you lot. I have a Canon 5D Mark II to compare with the actual camcorders. This isn't apples for apples though, because we are not recording on a Ninja, we're recording internally only, and it's different glass, albeit still Zeiss glass. It's the ZE 35mm f2. So optically, it should be the same as the CP.2s. Of course, this is a full frame camera. The Af100 has a 2x crop. The Sonys have a 1.6 crop. This shot now is super wide where I am on 35mm. I'm going to have to move a lot forward to try and match that. Of course, one of the biggest problems with DSLRs, and one of the things we're looking to with the new breed of camcorders, and hopefully with the new breed of DSLRs, is getting rid of aliasing and moire. I mean, just look at the aliasing on the 5D on this bridge. It's hideous. Look at it. Look at those sharp edges that, no, that's actually part of the bridge. That's not aliasing, sorry. In all seriousness, you do need to get the picture profile of the 5D Mark II down as soft as possible to avoid any chances of things like aliasing and moire. And I do have a neutral picture profile on here, which is a lot softer than a standard one. In a standard one, it's so overly saturated, so contrasty, and so sharp. When you punch in on the 1:1 on the Marshall, it looks nasty as hell. But when you punch in 1:1 on the neutral, it's actually pretty nice. Just as an initial comparison of some shots, I just did a general shot of the Richmond lock here with some tree and some water and stuff on all the cameras, and I've blown up each of the images 4 times. Obviously this is a completely impractical amount of magnification that you'd never use on a shoot, but just to give you an idea of the definition from each of the cameras and the amount of detail that's captured. So there is obviously a difference between them all. And just take a look at comparison between the 5D Mark II, the Af100/101, the Sony f3, and the Sony FS100. This isn't a depth of field comparison, this is simply a test to see how well these cameras can handle really strong contrasty situations. We have Suresh here, who's in the shade underneath the tree, and we have bright sunshine behind us. So obviously it is very contrasting and very difficult for these cameras to deal with. That is what this test is all about, not how shallow the camera can get in depth of field, because we know what's going to win that. It's the 5D Mark II. It's got the biggest sensor, so therefore it's going to have the shallowest depth of field. We're also doing a field of view test to see how a 35mm lens looks on each of these cameras on Suresh. And we're measuring it simply by putting a little bit of gaff tape on the actual railing here. And at the end of it, we'll see where the marks of the gaff tape are, just how much difference there is between the cameras. The next camera we've got up is the f3. This has a super 35mm sensor, so it's effectively around a 1.6 crop of the full frame 5D Mark II. So we're going to have to match the frame. I'm just going to move back a bit. So with the f3, I've moved back to this position, which roughly gives me about the same sort of frame as I had of Suresh, but of course the background is different because I have moved back, even though it's still a 35mm lens. I've tried to match the field of view, but the actual shot now looks different. Same size sensor, same size field of view, different camera, the FS100. So let's get them recording both on the Ninja and on the camera itself, and off she goes. Lighting's changed a bit, the sun's come off his face, but hey, what do you expect? Unless you have all these cameras rolling and ready to move in one after the other. This is just myself and Suresh doing this. So that's 5D Mark II. This is the F3 Super 35 chips. And let's see how far we have to move back to get a similar size frame for Suresh on the Af100. So it's not an enormous difference. There we go. So with the 5D Mark II as our first shot with the larger sensor, and this is the marking here for the 5D Mark II to get the medium close-up of Suresh. This is the marker for the Super 35 cameras, the F3 and the FS100. I'm always getting those mixed up. And this is the Af100, which we have now. So there is a difference between them all to get the same size shot, but it's not as big as you may think. For me, one of the most important tests is really just how they actually are to shoot. I'm not using these handheld because none of these work handheld well. They all need rigs like you get from Sakuto and other companies like that, which really help the ergonomics. I'm using a tripod, which is obviously the easiest way to simply use these cameras. Operation-wise, they're all quite different. They all have different ways of operating, especially obviously the DSLR compared to the video camera. But even the two Sonys are very, very different to operate. The Sony F3 is much more intuitive. I mean, part of that is because I'm a former EX1 owner and I still own my EX3, so there's a lot of familiarity with it. But obviously the ND and things like that help enormously. The Af100 I've had for a few months now, so obviously I'm quite used to using that. But all the buttons are quite obvious, and it is quite obvious and intuitive to use. The Canon DSLR, there's not much to it, to be honest with you. As we know, the buttons are pretty obvious. It's very simple to change stuff because there's no real in-depth video mode. The FS100 is a different beast. It's fiddly. I think that's the best word I can describe it. It's a fiddly camera to operate. There's lots and lots of buttons, and all of them are sort of recessed and relatively small. So it is quite hard to operate the actual camera by touch. You have to actually look at the buttons. Of course, this camera is very new to me, and therefore I don't know it well, and that is a big part of it. But when you have a side of the camera just covered in buttons, it's going to be very difficult to do anything by touch, even with experience. But it does mean it gives you lots of options, which are actually not just you have to get from the menu. They are actually available on the side of the camera, and that's a big plus. One interesting thing I found, though, was with the LCD screen on top, was simply when you turned it to the side, you couldn't actually tilt the screen down. The only time you could tilt the screen up and down is if it was directly facing forward or directly facing the other direction. If you turn it to the side and try and tilt the screen up and down, it doesn't work. That was a slight little quirk I found with the screen. But operation-wise, probably the AF and the F3 were very much on a par of ease of use when it comes to camcorders, certainly over the FS100. A big part of that is the lack of the ND filters and the way that the buttons are on the actual camera. This is nothing about images, this is purely about operation. and we all know how the Canons operate. Very easy to use, very simple, doesn't have the advantages of the exposure assist and the focus assist that the actual camcorders do. You're going to need to get a Zacuto EVF, which is going to give you exposure assist and focus assist, but it's obviously an additional cost, an additional expense. But then again, the EVFs out of all of these cameras are not very good, to be honest with you. Really, the best quality out of everything is the LCD screen. Of course, the LCD screen on the FS100 doubles as an EVF with the loop, but the resolution isn't super high. It is usable. It's not great. The positioning of that EVF is slightly awkward on the top of the camera. Certainly, I found that in operation use a little bit fiddly to use. This is a real test for the camera. This is a moire test that I'm doing right now. A completely, again, unscientific moire test. There's no chart. It's a brick wall at the other side of the river. With the 5D Mark II, I've switched to the 24-70 on the 70 end. The reason being is I don't have an 85mm lens for the Canon with me, and that is what I would need to match the 50mm on the Super 35 sensors. This is giving us a rough approximation. For me, having slow motion in these cameras is a big deal. It's something I miss out at the 5D Mark II, although the other Canons do have a 720p, 50p, 60p mode, although the picture quality isn't great because of the line skipping, it throws away more information. But if you shoot well with it, you can get some very nice slow motion. The Af100 has full HD slow motion. It doesn't do it in tiny increments, it does it in larger increments than, say, the F3, but it is full HD and we do have increments, but it only records as overcrank, as in there is no sound. So when you play it back, it plays it back as 24p or 25p, whatever you set it to, but it can overcrank in full HD to 60 frames per second. That's a big deal, and it looks lovely. The F3 can also do overcrank to 60 frames per second, and its increments are literally 1 frame, which are fantastic. Big downside, only 720p. So the AF certainly beats it on features wise there, but the F3 does have the minute increments. But compared to the AF, I would rather have full HD with larger increments. Although the 720 does still look good. The FS100 also does full HD, and it also does 50p or 60p, but that depends upon your actual region. The US camera will do 60p, and it'll also do 60 frames per second overcrank, so it will record both sound and the silent playing back at slow motion, which is great to have both options, which neither of the other cameras do. But there's no increments. It's either 60p or nothing, or 50p or nothing. So that's a downside, having no control over how slow you want it to be. But if you can live without that fine control, the slow motion out of the FS100 is absolutely lovely because it is full HD like the AF. DSLRs have given us the ability to have amazing low light sensitivity compared to what we're used to on traditional video cameras, and that's what's so good about these new camcorders with large chips, is they are amazing in low light. This is the F3. it's at 9 dB. It doesn't have ISOs as such in the menu. You select it as gain, but this is what they've been worked out as. So 9 dB is 2000, 12 dB is 3200. It's so clean on the F3, I have to say. It is absolutely fantastic. The F3 is the clear winner for noise and latitude and just general sensitivity in low light. It is really, really superb. Had a very simple setup. I had the background lit, so my dad, who's smoking one single Cohiba, I need to point out, he's only smoking one cigar here, which he keeps putting out and lighting again. A big thanks to my dad for doing this. Just so we could see when it's dark, you can see him silhouetted. As you can see at the start of this AF shot. Unfortunately, on the Af100 shot that starts here, I didn't quite get my dad in focus. That is a mistake, but I grabbed him in focus by this point. It's not as good in low light. It is a smaller chip than the F3, so it is to be expected. I'm using a custom profile, which helps with reducing noise in low light. There is a slight expense of latitude, but I have compensated for this in the grade to bring back that amount of latitude. So, as I say, it's a very simple setup. I put some fairy lights in the background to create some nice bokeh, and also had the shed lit and had a little bit of general ambient light from all light. On the FS100, very similar to the F3 as far as I can tell. I'd have to really examine the image really closely. I think it's slightly noisier, but only slightly noisier. And here we are at 12 decibels of gain, which is 3200 ISO. And it looks fantastic, it really does. 3200 ISO, and it looks clean. You have to say that is absolutely fantastic. So up to 6400 ISO on the FS100, and again, it looks almost as clean as the F3. Very difficult to tell the difference. It is a very sensitive camera. The chip inside these two Sonys is really quite superb. Going on to 30 dB now, which there are some increments between the previous 18 dB and 30, but 30 is the maximum. Rather than just have all the increments, I just wanted to show just how far it can go. Yes, there is noise here, but you could clean it up with Neat Video or Magic Bullet Denoiser, and you could get rid of it. 25,600 ISO, it is really incredible. I couldn't see this with my eye. Incredibly sensitive, and this is where the FS100 wins in respect. It has this crazy high ISO. 5D Mark II, we know it's a fantastic camera in low light. Unfortunately, the field of view is really quite substantially different, purely because I didn't have a comparable lens with me. Again, I apologize about that, but hopefully you can still see there's still latitude there. It's still very sensitive in low light, and I simply started at 1600 ISO, went up to 3200 ISO. You can see my dad is well overexposed on the match 3200 ISO, and then I push it to the max I would ever go on the 5D Mark II. Even 3200 ISO is pretty high, and there's noise there. There's a lot of noise in the 6400 ISO, and it's quite a digital noise compared to what you get from the actual Sonys, which is actually more of a grain than a noise, but very sensitive. The 5D Mark II, of course, is a fantastic low light camera. It was a very interesting test to do this one.